There is a strange stage of psychological growth that almost nobody talks about. At first, it feels like an advantage. You start noticing things other people miss. A shift in someone's tone, the insecurity hiding behind confidence, the unspoken tension in a room. You begin to understand people faster than they understand themselves, and for a while, it feels powerful, like you've stepped behind the curtain of human behavior. But then something unexpected begins to happen. The more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to feel connected to anyone. Carl Jung believed this moment was not a failure of growth, it was actually one of its most dangerous stages, because the same awareness that allows you to see deeper into human nature can slowly turn you into a spectator of life instead of a participant. And once that happens, wisdom quietly transforms into isolation. The hidden goal of psychological growth. Most people think the goal of self-awareness is clarity, to understand your patterns, to see your projections, to recognize unconscious behavior. But Jung believed clarity alone was never the real goal. The real goal was integration. Integration means something very specific, not simply seeing the truth about yourself, but remaining human while seeing it. Because there is a psychological trap waiting for people who become highly perceptive, a trap Jung observed in many of his patients, and sometimes in himself. The moment awareness changes everything. Imagine someone who has spent years studying psychology. They've analyzed their childhood, worked through trauma, examined their relationships. They understand projection, attachment, defense mechanisms. Eventually, something shifts in the way they see the world. Conversations start revealing patterns immediately. Someone says they are fine, but the tension in their voice tells a different story. Two people argue, and you can already see the childhood wounds driving both sides. In a meeting, someone acts confident, but you recognize the subtle signs of insecurity. At first, this kind of perception feels empowering, but then a subtle emotional distance begins forming, because once you see patterns everywhere, ordinary interactions start feeling scripted. You stop hearing what people say, you hear what they mean beneath it. And suddenly you're not just talking to people anymore, you're analyzing them. The birth of the observer identity. Psychologically, something important happens at this stage. You stop identifying as a participant in life and start identifying as the observer of life. You watch social dynamics like a chess match. You predict emotional reactions before they happen. You see relational cycles repeating years in advance. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, you're right. But this accuracy creates a new problem, because the clearer the patterns become, the harder it becomes to forget them. When insight becomes isolation. Carl Jung described a stage of development where individuals become highly differentiated from the collective mind. In simple terms, they stop operating on social autopilot. They start thinking for themselves. They stop projecting unconscious patterns onto others. But Jung noticed something strange. The individuals who reached this stage often described the same experience: loneliness. Not ordinary loneliness, a specific kind. The loneliness of watching dynamics unfold that nobody else seems to notice. Family arguments that repeat the same script every holiday. Friendships based entirely on unspoken insecurities. Workplaces driven by ego battles disguised as professionalism. And when you point it out, the room goes silent. Not because you're wrong, but because you've broken an invisible rule. The rule that says, we don't talk about the deeper pattern. The ego's most seductive trap. Here's where things can become dangerous, because when someone consistently sees patterns others cannot, the ego begins telling a story, a very seductive story. The story sounds like this: maybe I understand things others don't. At first, this thought seems harmless, but slowly it evolves. Maybe I see deeper than others. Maybe I'm more aware. Maybe I've outgrown the people around me. And without realizing it, something shifts. Insight becomes identity. You're no longer someone who has perception. You become the perceptive one. And that identity quietly changes how you relate to people. When understanding becomes superiority. Jung had a name for this transformation. He called it psychological inflation. Inflation happens when the ego begins identifying with an archetype. Instead of saying, I sometimes have insight, the mind starts saying, I am the one who sees. And once that belief takes root, curiosity disappears. Because when you believe you already understand people, you stop listening to them. You stop asking questions. You start explaining them. The therapist trap. You've probably met someone like this, without realizing it. Someone who responds to emotional conflict not with vulnerability, but with analysis. Instead of saying, that hurt me, they say, I think your behavior is related to unresolved childhood attachment patterns. Technically, they might even be correct, but something important is missing: connection. Because the moment you turn people into psychological case studies, they stop feeling seen, they start feeling examined, and relationships slowly collapse under the weight of constant interpretation. The real purpose of awareness. Jung believed this was the critical test of psychological maturity, not whether you could see patterns, but whether you could see them without standing above them. He called it the solution something deceptively simple: conscious participation, which means something very specific. It means choosing to remain inside life, even when you understand it. The courage to re-enter the mess. The ego loves distance. Distance feels safe. Distance allows you to observe without being affected. But conscious participation requires the opposite. It requires vulnerability. Instead of diagnosing someone's behavior, you say something far more human. I notice something happening between us, but I might be wrong. Instead of assuming you understand someone's motives, you ask. Instead of predicting the outcome of a conversation, you allow yourself to be surprised. This might sound small, but psychologically it's enormous, because it dismantles the observer identity. Wisdom that connects instead of separates. When perception is held with humility, something extraordinary happens. People begin experiencing you differently. You're no longer the unsettling person who sees too much. You become something rare. Someone who notices patterns, but uses that awareness to create safety instead of judgment. You see defenses, but you don't expose them. You recognize wounds, but you don't label them. You allow people to discover things about themselves in their own time. And suddenly, the same awareness that once created distance creates connection. The real meaning of wisdom. Jung believed true wisdom had a very different purpose than most people imagine. Wisdom is not meant to elevate you above others. It's meant to make you more present with them. The deepest awareness does not create separation. It creates compassion. Because when you truly understand human behavior, you stop expecting perfection. You start recognizing how deeply everyone is shaped by forces they barely understand. And that recognition changes the way you move through the world. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. There will always be moments when awareness makes you feel different, when you notice dynamics others miss, when you see patterns unfolding before they fully appear. That perception is not a flaw, it's a capacity. But Jung's warning remains important. Perception without humility becomes arrogance. Insight without compassion becomes surveillance. And wisdom without participation becomes loneliness. The real challenge of psychological growth is not learning to see clearly. It is learning to see clearly while still choosing to sit at the table with everyone else. Because the most powerful form of awareness is not the kind that stands above life and explains it. It's the kind that stays inside life and helps others understand it too.